Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Great Day Houston. June 1st is the official start of hurricane season. For the past 64 years, KHOU 11 has kept viewers informed. In fact, former KHOU Director of News Dan Rather was the first television reporter in history to broadcast a hurricane coming in on live TV. When Hurricane Carla made landfall in 1961, Rather was reporting from the seawall in Galveston.
Mr. Watney, can we move into the radar room now? There is the eye of the hurricane right there. You can see it very clearly on the radar. A beautiful picture from our radar area in there now.
Today, we're better at predicting what might happen, but one thing we still can't do is control Mother Nature. Joining us with this season's predictions and what we've learned from past storms, please welcome KHOU 11 meteorologist Brooks Garner. Good morning, Brooks.
Good morning. What a pleasure to be on Great Day Houston this morning.
Oh, there you go. You had to travel far, didn't you?
Yeah, it was a long way going from Studio A to Studio A, but here we are.
Yeah. All right. So every year people look forward to the predictions, but as we always say, it only takes one.
Exactly. Everybody always asks, is this going to be the year that Houston gets hit by a hurricane? And the answer is we just don't know until they form, but we have an idea using the latest science. You can have a really busy hurricane season, Deborah. You can have 25 storms, but if a storm doesn't hit you, well, that season is forgotten in a matter of weeks. But
how do they predict?
It can change.
I know people have been talking about the weather pattern right now, and it's like a little cooler than we expected it to be. And how does that impact what might become a bad hurricane season?
Well, there's one major climate driver, and that is El Nino. And El Nino
is El Nino still around?
It was, and it looks like it's not anymore. When El Nino forms, it produces a lot of trade winds in the Atlantic Ocean, and that could rip hurricanes apart. This year, the latest thinking is that El Nino may not be as strong as previously thought. That could up our hurricane count. And it's kind of like Russian roulette. The more hurricanes you have out there, the more likely your chance. But again, it does only take one for it to be like the worst season in memory, even if statistically overall, it's one of the slowest seasons in history.
All right, every storm has its own fingerprint, and we've learned a lot from those storms. Let's go back to Hurricane Katrina, which was the thing that caught a lot of us off guard because it wasn't really scheduled to hit us in Houston, but we ended up receiving all those folks who were victim to that. Infrastructure was one of the lessons that we learned.
Absolutely. Katrina was a lesson on so many fronts, and actually, because Katrina was such a major catastrophe when it came to relief efforts and all of the politics associated with it, when a few weeks later Hurricane Rita formed, many in Houston remember getting out of town, seeing what happened to Katrina. It was another monster Cat 5, and they left. But the problem
with Katrina and Rita, it also taught us about evacuation plans because we didn't expect to receive all those folks from Louisiana. They had a plan there to go to the Superdome, and things just started falling apart, and they ended up coming here. Now with Rita, people, you're right, people got out, which brings up the question of when they tell you who should leave and who should not. When they say you don't need to leave, you don't need to leave. Hunker down.
That is so important because with Rita, we lost dozens of people, not to the storm, but to car accidents and in overheating cars. There was a huge fire on a bus, a horrible tragedy there in Rita, and it was a lesson learned that it took, I heard, 24 hours to get from Houston to Dallas in some cases.
Yeah, if you got there. See, a lot of people were sleeping in their cars.
Ran out of gas.
Yeah, and that was the other thing. Gas stations closed because people said, oh, evacuate? Okay, we're leaving too, and we couldn't get gas.
And now so many people say, I'm never leaving again for another hurricane, and it's important to know where your evacuation zone is, because if you're in Galveston and you say, I'm never going to leave again, that's a really bad decision. But if you're in Pearland or in Friendswood or in coastal counties but inland towns, you may not have to leave. In other words, you don't want to contribute to that gridlock and all the horrible human pain that was endured during that evacuation.
Of course, the other thing was contraflow lanes.
Right, and that's new now too. So if we do have another evacuation, contraflow lanes are when they reverse directions on, like, say, southbound lanes of the Gulf Freeway. Now all lanes would be northbound lanes, and that would, in theory, alleviate some of the traffic concerns.
Yeah, all right. Hurricane Ike was not necessarily the rain event for a lot of us. It was the wind event.
Right, and Hurricane Ike was 2008, 9 years ago. Hurricane Ike was an event that, believe it or not, technically did not hit Houston. We felt the effects, but the eye hit Galveston, went up the ship channel, and went north from there. So if it had traveled a little bit farther west, like if it had hit San Luis Pass or it had hit Matagorda County, Houston would have been in a world of pain it did not experience during Ike. And Ike was horrible for so many people. Power out for weeks.
Yeah, out of power because of the strong wind. And also kind of changed the way we look at categories, right? Didn't we have like a wind category as opposed to just the rain?
Over the Gulf, Ike was a huge huge storm, major hurricane. It weakened right before it hit land, but it still had a lot of that impact, a lot of the storm surge and the winds. But that was a great example as well of a storm that didn't hit directly, but we still got major effects from it. Again, the dirty side of the storm, that east side missed downtown Houston. Imagine if it had traveled just a few miles farther west.
All right, we talked about earlier how we can predict things coming, but Mother Nature has the last word. That was certainly the case with Tropical Storm Allison. In the beginning was just kind of a so-so storm,
Allison.
right?
Oh, Allison, yes. Allison, known for the heavy rain, feet and feet of rain, massive flooding, a city deluged underwater, folks unfortunately dying in the floodwaters trying to drive through it. It crippled the city. And that wasn't even a hurricane. It was a tropical storm. The pictures of water all the way to the top of the 59 Southwest Freeway. There you go. Check it out. Oh, my goodness.
I remember when it came through, okay, the rain's passed, but it kind of came back and then it sat on top of us. It wasn't moving, and that's what dumped all that rain.
That's what's so fickle about tropical systems. Very little steering currents in the atmosphere to move them out. So you don't need a major hurricane to cause a catastrophic result. Look at that Mack truck in Houston. So we are one of the most susceptible cities in the country.
We're not that far above sea level, so we get a drop of rain, and you need to pay attention. All right, talk about the hurricane guide that we have, because we've had this out for several years. What can people get out of that?
Well, this year you can pick it up at any Academy Sports and Outdoor, and the Hurricane Guide is a fantastic resource, because what we don't think about is when power's out for a couple of weeks, your smartphone, your computer, well, it may die. You may not have that backup generator or a charging source. So this is a physical piece of paper you can hold in your hand, a nice little booklet with all the information of your evacuation zones. There's also a tracking map and also some good tips to remember as you're enduring a storm, because there's so many things in a hurricane that when you're experiencing it, if you haven't done so already, that you don't even think about. Medications, insurance policies.
I'm going to go through that whole list in a minute. In fact, the folks that you saw on that tracking guide are on the show today, so they have some great tips for us. I want to kind of round out with a couple of things here. One is we have all the information, we have the computers and all that type of stuff, but at the end of the day, what we also have are people like you who are experts. I remember with Rita, I came back, I was working in the news at the time here. I walked back to David Paul and I said, all right, David, if your son and husband are living in this house right here, would you evacuate them? He said, you know what? We've been looking at this, and I've seen it one time before where it shifted, because at that time it was headed straight for Houston.
Oh, this is Rita.
Yeah, Rita. And he said, you know, I think it's going to shift. And sure enough, it did. So at the end of the day, we rely on experts like you all to be able to really tell us what to do in that given moment. All right, we have a couple of folks in the audience who have questions for you. This is from Gertrude. What's the difference between the 5 hurricane categories, and what do they mean? All
right, well, that's an important question, because obviously the stronger the storm, the greater the impacts. And before I go into it real quick, I want to go over and show you a cool graphic over here, Deborah. So come on over, we'll walk over. A little field trip. So Ike was a major storm, but it weakened right before it hit land, and it still had incredible impacts.
They usually kind of weaken over land, don't they, a little bit?
Oh, absolutely, And Allison wasn't even a hurricane, and it caused all those impacts. So when you look at these impact maps, just keep in mind, if Houston, or should I say when Houston gets hit by a major hurricane, the problems are unimaginable, especially since our region has grown so much. So it's super important not to let your guard down. But let's talk categories. There's 5 categories, categories 1 through 5. Minimal hurricane is a category 1. A major hurricane starts at a category 3. That's winds of about 111 miles per hour. Ike's winds were about Cat 2 strength. So if you consider the impacts we saw from Ike, imagine, and by the way, we could easily see one of these.
Wow.
If Rita had hit, I can't even imagine. Do you remember with Ike how it just wiped clean the Bolivar Peninsula?
Yes.
Ike was one of these, and if it had traveled farther west and hit Galveston, even with the seawall that's 17 feet tall, Ike's storm surge was in spots over 20 feet high, which would have lapped over the seawall and flooded all of those homes on the other side.
One of the 3rd most costly storms in U.S. history. So, and that was when it was just right here.
Yes, in Houston, in the last 9 years, has grown exponentially, so there's a lot more property. And one more thing on that, the longest stretch Houston has gone without seeing a hurricane is 16 years. And Houston, about every 9 years, sees a hurricane, and Ike was 9 years ago.
Let's just keep our fingers crossed. All right, Alex asked, we always hear the negative effects of hurricanes, but what are the benefits of a hurricane?
Well, a benefit of a hurricane in Houston would be rainfall. And I know that sounds a little counterintuitive because we showed you those horrible pictures of Allison's flooding rains, which certainly was not beneficial. But when it comes to our water table, tropical systems in Texas are one of the only sources for moisture. We have these wet seasons in the spring we're having right now with this really rainy forecast, and then we have our dry season, summertime. So tropical systems, especially when you just get a glancing blow, can provide some beneficial rains. You just don't want, of course, too much, but that is a major source of our water
the
table in the summer in
benefit is
Texas.
that you now have contraflow lanes, and you'll get insurance if you didn't before, right?
It forces you to prepare for any disaster. Listen, if you're prepared for a hurricane, you're prepared for the zombie apocalypse.
Yeah. Okay. All right, I'm going to ask you before we go, why did you decide to go into meteorology?
I've always loved weather, but when I was about 5 years old, I had a hurricane come through my town. I was living in Rhode Island. You don't think of New England as a place that gets hurricanes, but we got walloped, and I remember seeing a seagull flying as hard as it could, but it was flying backwards. And as a little kid, I thought, how is this possible? And from there, it was a hobby, and then became a habit, and now it's a career.
All right. Well, Brooks, thank you very much.
Well, it's been my pleasure. Thank you, Deborah.
All right. You can pick up our 2017 Hurricane Preparedness Guide at any Academy Sports and Outdoors, or right here at KHOU 11 Studios as well. They are also available for digital download on KHOU.com.